the physical objects and digital objects. And these three kind of formed together to make up an application of intelligent automation in travel and tourism. So that's the area that I'm researching on at the moment. Now, I started doing, of course, my research was dated back long before the pandemic, and the pandemic hits, right? And so to me, what has been very interesting to observe with the pandemics and the impacts that the pandemic has on travel and tourism is the roles of technology, is the perception that people, decision makers, service providers, public and private sectors about technology in the sector. In the past, I think a lot of tourism and travel stakeholders think of technology as novelty, as something nice to have, as something that requires lots of investment in terms of capital and also in terms of efforts to build capabilities and skills. Now, actually, because of the pandemic, I think there is a shift in the ways that people actually see technology. And then we actually also see gradually the ways that technologies have been used by the sector to navigate around the pandemic. So now I think people started seeing technology not only as something nice to have, but also as something essential for survival in the sector. And I'm going to go through this a little bit more. So to me, there are three things that I would like to highlight in terms of impacts of the pandemic on travel and tourism. So I have three images here. So the first image, basically, this is the fact that because of the pandemic now, businesses are collapsing, well, on the verge of collapsing because operations are forced to stop, right? So we don't, due to travel restrictions and a stay at home order, we see, of course, attractions, facilities in aviation, in terms of mobilities, hotels, and so on and so forth, they stop operating. And so that's one of the, to me, important impacts that technology could address. The second one, the middle image, that is related to to me, the complexity in terms of managing travel flow and travel restrictions. Now, this is, if we think of it at the global level, there are variations in terms of travel restrictions. So for some countries with really low infection rate, for example, travels are kind of allowed, domestic travel especially. And even within a country, there is variation in terms of travel restriction, and also it depends not only on the rate of infection and the virus spread or containment of the virus spread, but also related to the third one, the behavior of travelers themselves. So I live in England, and we just got out of the second lockdown, national lockdown, but regionally, we have different tier systems. So it's, for example, if you're in a tier 3, which is like super high risk, you're not allowed to travel outside of the region. But even before this tier system, we saw lots of issues with people going to the beach during the weekend, and then super crowded, and then we see a spike again. So this is a challenge that I think the sector should or must be able to address more in the future. And then the third one, I think that's very important, is the change in travelers' behavior. And what the image suggests here is that now, of course, travelers are becoming a lot more sensitive towards risk and health and safety and hygiene, right, when they're traveling. And what's important is not the change, the behavior change now at the current situation, but we also anticipate that perhaps there's going to be a more permanent change, not just temporary change in the ways that people travel, whether it's the destination that they go to, whether how they go to the destination in terms of mobility, in terms of the kinds of attractions that they are going to. And so all of these, to me, change or transform the sector now, and in the short term in the future, and in the medium term in the future. And so I have, this is already outdated. I was actually talking earlier this morning with a forum of governments, public sector, looking at the impact of COVID on tourism in various areas, various countries. And, the impact has been actually a lot more than this one, or a lot harder than this. So I'm trying to look at then what are the roles of technology in these, and we've probably seen some of these on the news or somewhere. We learn about how service providers and governments and the public sector have implemented several of what I've mentioned earlier in terms of AI and robotics and automated system to deal with operations. So it's basically this emphasizes what I mentioned earlier, that technology is seen not just something nice to have, but technology as something essential so that they are able to operate again, to open their business again, to welcome guests again. So an example here with facial recognition, or in this case, computer vision, to make sure that your guests are, they adhere to regulations. So if they are wearing face masks, then they can check into your hotel and things like that. So, and then hotels, robots to deliver things to the guest room, or to sanitize the rooms. So basically these are things that allow service providers to minimize or actually eliminate contact between personnel and guests, or amongst guests. And then the keyword here is maintaining a contactless service, and that technology is used as substitute in this case for service personnel. Now, if we talked about this before the pandemic, people will say, okay, well, it's going to undermine the service, because service is all about, human connection and so on and so forth. But then when we're talking about it now in the context of pandemic, then we can see that this is actually necessary. But to me, these are all short-term applications. It's more operational rather than strategic. So going back to the images that I shared, what I think the role of technology can play a role in terms of strategy to navigate the impact of COVID. One, for example, this is for the first issue that I mentioned, like businesses are collapsing because they cannot operate, and they have to, most of them are not, they don't have Slack resources, so they're not able to maintain their employees and so on. And to me, what technology can help there really is to allow for businesses, basically the sector, to be more resilient in the sense that if there is a system, for example, that can recommend different kinds of business models and give managers some kind of alert system and simulate what needs to be done in order for them to be able to pivot, for example, their business models. So this is one way that technology can play a role in this sense. Now, for the second one, what I mentioned about the difficulties of travel restrictions and mobilities and management of travelers' flow, essentially what technology can do, in this case, AI and big data and real-time data and the use of cyber physical systems, Internet of Things and so on, is to create personalized, and in this case, when as the virus is still around us, a safer travel experience, and it should be personalized, so not for mass offering, but tailored to, for example, a small group of people or even an individual. So for example, if I'm going to, let's say, go to the beach here, let's say if I go to Portsmouth, I live in Guildford, so south of England. If I want to go to the beach, and then I would be able to see whether it's safe for me to go there now, or should I go, if I should postpone until next week, for example. And then the third one that relates to changes in people's behavior. Now we actually see during the pandemic how powerful information can be and how powerful technology can help in terms of educating people or keep people informed about risk, about what to do in certain situations related to the pandemic. And to me, I think this is an opportunity that we can actually leverage technologies to do this, so that we can provide intervention in terms of education, in terms of information or presentation of things that allow us to give nudges, to nudge people, to intervene, to influence people so that they can behave more responsibly when they start traveling again. So these are these three areas to me should be kind of like a low-hanging fruit to some extent, to help destination service providers navigate around the impact of COVID in the medium term. Now, the challenge, the real challenge for the future of tourism post-COVID is how can we transition to a more sustainable practice, right? To a more sustainable society, essentially, is more sustainable tourism. So again, I have a quote here. The best way to protect the future is to create it. And that's Peter Drucker saying this, and also Abe Lincoln, if I'm not mistaken. So to me, I think if we want to transition into a more sustainable practice, a more sustainable tourism, this should be an opportunity for us to rethink. This is the pause, and we need to rethink how we can create a path so that we can go. We can transition into a more sustainable future. So I'm going to share one of the things that we did. This is before COVID. We applied a technique called travel futuring. So we're basically utilizing a psychological technique of futuring. That is when a unit, an entity, a social entity, whether it's a country, a destination, a group of people, recognizing their capability to envision the future and actually start realizing or kind of imagining what will be the feasible, possible, and desirable future. And so they can define where they would like to go to in the next, 20, 50 years or so. And knowing or defining what we want to be, what we want the sector to look like in the future would allow us to then step back and create a path, create steps of what we need to do for us to be able to get there, to be able to get to the desired future state. So in this case, this is an exercise not only about envisioning, but also a task to actually strategize what we need to do as part of an entity, whether it's again a country, even globally, or a sector. So basically, combining this idea of futuring and also creating sustainability transitions or sustainability transitions pathways, we did this exercise where we asked travelers to write letters from the future. And we did this in 2019, so that's before COVID-19. And we collected letters from travelers in the UK and in the US, and we got about 150 letters full of really, really wild imagination, some of them. So I'm going to share one. And this is, let's see if it plays.
Dearest Anne, I arrived in New Zealand after the 90-minute suborbital flight from the Space Dome in Kent. You can see the curve of the Earth from the window, and on landing, you cannot feel any G-forces at all. I'm glad this country has been kept as a park for the children. No super fast 10G reception here. Some of them are looking a little lost at the moment, but after talking to our advisor, he tells me it takes about 3 days for them to get used to it. We can walk on real grass and enjoy nature, as we have seen on Skylink TV. Sorry I can't speak to you over Skylink. It's back to Stone Age here. Got to use the old internet. We are on the 100th floor with a sea view. But get this, there is no food auto-serve or auto clothes wash, and best of all, no sonic shower. Would you believe it? We have to shower with real water. That sounds like fun. Make sure you bring your plastic pay card, as eye scans do not work here. There is no infrastructure. Wonder how they get by. I'm so glad this place has been saved from the great pollution of the oceans. On day 2, we are to board an eco-friendly submarine to the Antarctic to help the remaining wildlife. I know you have always had a soft spot for the bears. It's a shame there are so few left. After we return to Big Island, we have 7 days to do what we like. You can do sports or just chill out without the noise of Skylink. I am told there is a choice of 17th, 18th or 19th century places to eat, served by a real waiter. Eddie.
Sorry. Oh, there we go. So, well, I think that the example in the letter is really a little bit extreme to some extent, because you can see the imagination of how advanced the technology will be. There will be lots of automation everywhere, including sonic shower and so on. But one of the purposes of this exercise was to actually look deeper into what people's hopes are and concerns are about not just tourism and travel, but also the state of the world around us. And so from the video, I'm sure you got this different aspects of concerns for climate change and environmental pressure on you see the quality of the water and so on, in addition to how advanced technology will be with 10G and everything else. Not sure if that's going to happen in 20 years, but I think the important thing is that by collecting this letters and imaginations, we could actually capture lots of concerns and hopes that people have about the future. And just also a note that, in New Zealand, it's a little bit inaccurate that the bear is not there. So it's in the other pole. But anyway, that was one of the letters. And I also have quotes here that one is a little bit, I think one is optimistic about provision of food on the moon, but on the other hand, also kind of highlight the concern about things on Earth. And also another one, the Airbnb on the moon is run by a Chinese family. They migrated to the moon when China was overpopulated in 2020s. And so that's also something that, we see a little bit deeper into it. We actually found lots of patterns across different concerns. So there are 3 things I think that we found from this exercise, and they are the drivers of people's imagination of the futures of travel. And there's a spectrum, of course, from dystopian future, really, really bad, really, really ugly future, and the utopian one, where people, imagine really, really, really nice things. But underneath, there are 3 things that people talk about. One is the societal change. So most people talk about isolation and increasing social disintegration. And I think that's relevant now in the COVID era, where we're all in lockdown, we're not allowed to see a lot of people, where we're only allowed to mingle with the people in our household and nobody else. And so that's also, I think, one of the concerns that that people have. Now, a second one is technological innovation, which basically what I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And then the third one really is about an environmental pressure. So people talk about, climate change, global warming, and also depletion of resources for energy. So people are talking about this. If we still want to travel in the future, we need really to think about, to find ways to have alternative energy. Some key lessons. I'm not sure if I'm good with time. Some key lessons.
You have time. Please continue.
Sorry. Yes. Some key lessons. One is the needs for travel. So despite all these concerns, right? Despite all the bad things that people imagine that the world is going to have, there were talks about the rising sea levels, wildlife being extinct, and all kinds of things. People still imagine that they are still going to travel. And so to me, I think this highlights, the nature of human beings. Still, we are still curious to see other people, other places that are not too familiar. And so when some people were talking about going to New Zealand from the UK or to Brazil, international travel, actually some letters mention about going to the moon and Mars and basically space exploration. So when they feel like in 20 years they might have seen basically the Earth, and then they move outside of the Earth to travel. So essentially, to me, that says one thing about post-COVID tourism, that although we may see changes in the patterns of how people travel, where people travel to, and so on. So perhaps the first thing that people will do when they could travel again, and when international travel restrictions are still in place, is to roam around their own country. But to me, I think people will still be traveling. And so it's a matter of how they and where they're traveling to. Now, the second thing that I would like to point out is, although in the letters people are talking a lot about concerns for the environment, but I think the underlying concern that they have is really concerns of humanity, of us, of how society will sustain, how we sustain society in the future. And so I think that's really, really important, because when we talk about, I know Brian mentioned about the SDGs, one of the things that we do have, in addition to the environment, really is about people and how we put people first. And even though I'm a technology researcher, I believe that technology needs to be developed for the benefit of us. So people first. So 5 things from the letters that I summarized. One is people are really looking at the roles of technology for travel facilitation. So they, basically making travel shorter, more comfortable, safer, healthier. 2 is about automation and assistance. So essentially making sure that you do less effort essentially when you are traveling, or when you are experiencing the destination. Now 3, which is significant, I think, also in the COVID era, is replacing portions of travel. So people don't talk about replacing travel completely, but you don't have to travel to travel that much anymore, for example, because now we can actually do this like the conference now with Zoom. We can still have a meaningful conversation and discussions with this. But of course, we do need to travel sometimes, but not all the time like before. Then I mentioned this, finding alternative sources of energy. And also one of the important thing is, to me, also for destinations now, is helping with finding more accurate projection of the travel impact in the future. Now that sets some foundations for the development of what kind of systems do we need to develop, right? In order for us to be able to address this. One, to me, is develop AI that's robust, and responsible. So it means that we 5 minutes. Oh, sorry. So AI for good. And then inclusive AI. So basically the system that would not exclude people from travel, from society, from making contribution to society. And then the last one to me, that's very important, is humanity first. So back to my point earlier, human first. So, if we do have, we know how to develop technology, and we have systems to develop things. We don't have, it's not necessary that we have to do it unless it's beneficial for us. So I tried to place these 5 into the boxes that I had earlier. And I think, the 2, for example, replacing portions of travel and having accurate projection, that would help addressing concern number 1 that I have. And then facilitation and automation would help with concern number 2. And the rest with concern number 3 related to change in people's behavior. Just to close, this is my last slide. To me, these are some of the key areas for us as scholars to explore in the future regarding AI and tourism and related sectors. So one really is how can we design beneficial AI? How do we facilitate responsible adoption of AI? So not just encouraging people to adopt, but making sure that it's adopted responsibly. So for example, making sure that we address, the sustainable development goals in this application, and then assessing comprehensively the impacts of AI applications in the sector, and then of course the last one is how do we create sustainable future with AI, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your insightful presentation, and especially from 2039. Oh my goodness, service by a real waiter. Probably that is the reality. It will happen. Now, as I'm the moderator, I also have the right and the honor to ask the first question to the 2 speakers, as others will be using the chat to add more questions. There are some already. So let me start with you, Brian. And in one of your slides in your presentation, you spoke about tourism as a way forward. So given the current pandemic situation and given the statistics that it will take 3 to 5 years for tourism to resume or to come to the levels that they are pre-COVID or 2019 levels, what is the role of domestic tourism? And more importantly, for a destination like Singapore, where domestic tourism is not a real option, what may be your suggestions? So, if you don't mind.
Sure. Okay, so well, with the domestic one, I mean, it's interesting what Vietnam is doing on. I showed the figures for aviation, that Vietnam has handled the pandemic quite well, and they have very interesting cooperation between their cities. So Ho Chi Minh City, Da Nang, Hanoi, and then the airline. I mean, they are really mobilizing domestic. I think that's really quite impressive, because Vietnam's not a rich country, but they obviously want to get back quickly. So thinking of that spirit of cities working collaboratively then. So they obviously have a bigger domestic market than, and then you've got a city-state like Singapore. Well, of course, Singapore was hoping for the travel bubble for Hong Kong, but our situation was probably what burst the bubble. But I mean, Singapore already has, not exactly the fully fledged bubble that they've got with Hong Kong, but they have arrangements with mainland China, with Vietnam, with a range of other places. So I think Singapore will do these little pilot exercises with different markets, depending on the state of the pandemic in different places. So they will work closely with the locals, so get people traveling within Singapore, and then they'll venture out to whoever they're friendly with and can do comparative health codes. It was disappointing the one with Hong Kong didn't take off, but look, I'm quite impressed by what Singapore's done with hybrid events. You know, they're already hosting substantial, using their health codes, etc. So look, I think you're right. Singapore is a bit of a challenge because it's so small, but they're being very proactive in working with a range of partners. Just unfortunately with Hong Kong, a little bit delayed.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Is my question goes to you, and that is about tourism, and you know, as we appreciate the travel and tourism is about immersive business, going to a new destination, and how does, of course, digitization does have a role in enhancing efficiency and automating, making things more productive, but to what extent would automation or digitization be possible in tourism sector as a, let's say, a headline remark, if you will?
Yeah, so I think when we think about automation, and also forgive me for all the examples, I also led I think a lot of people to think this way, but most people associate automation with like only the customer facing one, so like kind of the one with personal with direct contact. But to me, what happens, what's exciting for tourism is really what happens in the back end. So the back of house, right? So now, believe it or not, I think most of the marketing processes, for example, and intelligence and dashboards and so on, are implemented with artificial intelligence and automation. So there are lots of automated tourism system. Marketing system for tourism in terms of content creation and also creating market segments and so on and so forth. So that has been automated already. So, and when we talk about revenue management and so on, and now what people find controversial is always when it's visible to consumers, and so things like robots, things like automated check-in, facial recognition, and so on and so forth. And also because there are, I think when you feel that the impact is going to be, how can I say, directly on you, then you become more critical. How can I say, to this development, but yeah. So to me, I think we are already in the phase where automation has been implemented in many different facets of the sector, and if we look at lots of initiatives, especially led by private sectors, in terms of, for example, seamless travel. So we actually already see lots of the development of these, and people seem to be okay with it as long as it makes traveling safer and more convenient.
Thank you. Yes, it is certainly the future of travel. In fact, your last few comments segues well into one of the questions from the audience that Nandifa David talks about how AI and how automation has taken or has sped up due to the current pandemic situation, and you just remarked that it is going to stay long. So does that mean that AI and automation is going to take away some of the jobs in the future?
Yeah, it's always an area that we with controversy that we talk about when we talk about AI and robotics and automation, right? Job losses. So not only in tourism, but also in other sectors, services, but especially so in tourism and hospitality, because we are like in people's business. To me, we did this particularly, we did a study, sorry, to address this particular issue, looking into SDG 8, providing decent jobs for everyone, essentially. So the key to me is not whether or not we implement automation and robotics, but how we implement automation and artificial intelligence. So the key for me is, if we implement automation, we have to make sure that the goal is not to replace people or employees, but to augment them. And so, for example, if we take restaurants or hotels, right, with cleaning services, and so it's menial job, it's risky, prone to accidents and so on. And so if we can automate some of these parts and then have humans just to do probably more of the supervision part, so the key to me is in the task allocation and the human-machine collaboration. So in this case, then we remove the menial routine tasks from human and allocate them more meaningful tasks, relational tasks, for example, to talk with customers more, to interact with them, to socialize, but not doing lots of the transactional ones, which can be automated, like paying and producing bills and these things. These are not, I think, this doesn't add to the value of service for the customers anyway.
Sure. Dr. Devi Kausar, our chairperson for the conference, and her question is also very well aligned to your previous comment, and this goes to both Brian and to you, and that is, given the current pandemic learnings that we have, and of course, opportunities and challenges which may be widening, widening income gap within countries or between countries, and even like technology taking over some of the jobs. What is it that we as academics, because okay, ITSA is about research, but at heart, most of us are academics, we are teachers. What is it that we academics or faculty should be mindful of and cover in our classes so that our graduates are better prepared, one, for the workforce, and two, for care for the humanities? So let me go to Brian first, and then to you, is Brian.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Abhishek, and thanks, Devi. Good question. So I'll respond thinking of my role here in Hong Kong, where we had the protests and then COVID-19. So we've had about a year of having to think about delivering things differently. And then I also did an audit of a university in Finland a few days ago. So a 2-day online audit of all the things that they've been doing. And it was interesting to see what they're doing around sustainability, the consumer experience, technology, etc. I'd say two bits to this. Firstly, with COVID-19, there's obviously how, with our disrupted education, how we think about incorporating the more online component within what we do face to face. So kind of hybrid. So thinking about creative MOOCs, incorporating that into our delivery. What's the role of the online components, the synchronous, asynchronous, all that type of thing. So I think that's confronting all of us globally in dealing with education through COVID-19. The second part is the curriculum content. So what should we be teaching? And I think behind my comments today, I think that as time has gone on, as the WTO came within the United Nations purview, as we've seen in Asia, poverty alleviation and tourism kind of sitting cheek by jowl, I think we need our students to, we need to have the Sustainable Development Goals inside our curriculum structure. So it's not just about environmental sustainability, it's also about communities, it's about rural areas and agriculture development and so on. I think the Best End Group has done good work on sustainability around that, so that they have I guess, taken curriculum side, and I've attended conferences where they get the conference delegates to encourage the students to be like environmental advocates. So don't just tell them about sustainability, give them the tools so they can build that into projects. Now, maybe just to finish off with what we do at PolyU, and this is beyond my own school, all students do service learning as part of their curriculum. So they'll go to either overseas or with Hong Kong. They'll work with a community on an environmental project or on a aged care or something like that. And the idea is that in the spirit of experiential learning, our students don't just think about poor people. They actually go into the community and they're engaging in meaningful projects in dialogue, whether in their home community or in Africa or somewhere else. And so I think that aspect of experiential learning, maybe not all of your institutions are doing that in the way they're doing it at PolyU. So then it comes back maybe more into the tourism curriculum. But so there are, to me, different dimensions of this, but we need our students to embrace holistic, the interconnectedness of tourism with other fields, and also for the students to really feel it and then to become advocates for doing things better. So thank you, Debbie, for the question.
Is?
Yeah, I think, okay, to me, there are several different issues related to this. So in addition to the COVID and the fact that similar to what I mentioned, the sector has been adopting technology in an accelerated pace. We as universities and academic institutions and in the business of producing the next generation tourism and hospitality leaders, we are also, I think, experiencing this accelerated movement to embrace technology in our teaching and learning. And because of what's happening in the sector, I'm talking about Surrey specifically, but I think it's probably universal that we are we are experiencing the decline in terms of confidence from students undertaking tourism and hospitality, maybe kind of like a little bit more pessimistic look about the future, and so on. And then there's also the issue about value of degrees. Do we need to have degrees now to actually go into the industry? So to me, I think there are two aspects that we then kind of like strategically play with. If play is, I don't know if play is the right word, but one is temporal aspect and another one is the spatial aspect. So the spatial is like basically with our online capabilities or with the increased capabilities of offering online learning, then we actually can reach much more audience in addition to the students that we typically have. So that's kind of advancing, more offering off-site learning experiences. Now, the second aspect is the temporal aspect. Now we're looking into sectors that are experiencing a huge shock because of the pandemic. And we see actually, our alumni working in the industry now trying to go back and maybe getting more insights from us, what needed to be done since they graduated and since they studied with us. And so to me, that's in addition to having increased capabilities in offering online education or online learning and content in that space, is also having focusing more on lifelong learning. So it's not just like having students to stay with us for the 4 years or 5 or something until they get their masters, but really it's nurturing them so that they can still be contributing to the industry and be responsive to change. And that brings me to the next point, which is, I think, because of the volatility of the environment and who knows when this black swan events are going to come again in the future and how it's going to impact the industry. I think more important now than before, at least for us, is not is to transform the way that we teach our students. So not only focusing on the skills that they need to have when they graduate, but actually to make them change makers, because I think that's the way that we can survive volatility in the future. So really looking into, I think, ways for us to teach them different skills.
Thank you. Well, Brian and the desktop clock is staring in my face, telling me that our time is up. So thank you both for your presentations and taking the questions so wonderfully. Thank you again. I urge the audience to join me in thanking our two speakers. And with that, I hand you back to the conference secretary. Thank you.
Abhishek? Hello, Abhishek, can you hear me?
Yes, Devi?
Yeah, we have a certificate for both speakers, Prof. Brian and Prof. Ilyas.
Fantastic.
Okay. Good. Please, Abhishek.
Yes, so Prof. Brian King, thank you again for addressing the ITSA 8th ITSA 2020 conference, and as a token of appreciation, please accept our this e-certificate for your contribution.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
And along the same lines, Prof. Tussyadiah, thank you again for making time. I know it's probably pretty early for you, early in the day, but again, I'm sure the audience has benefited tremendously by your sharing. And yes, technology is there to stay, and we need to mend ourselves. So thank you again, and please accept this e-certificate as a token of appreciation.
Thank you for James Cook University Singapore team. Now, welcome back participants and presenters.